Montana Territory, early autumn of 1874, the air sharp with pine and distant snow. The knock came just after dusk, 3 quick raps on the cabin door, brittle with desperation. Thomas Merrick set down his hunting knife, his boots still damp from the creek, and moved slow toward the sound. He had not seen another soul in 6 days and was not expecting company. When he opened the door, the cold wind swept in, along with the sight of a woman, mud on her dress, hair tangled, cheeks hollow. She looked no older than 20, but there was something in her eyes that had seen far too much. "Please," she said, voice shaking. "I need food." He stared at her for a beat too long, taking in the faded white lace at her sleeves, the torn hem of her wedding dress, and the ring still clinging to her finger like an afterthought. "You alone?" he asked, stepping back to let her in. She nodded, clutching the shawl tighter around her shoulders as she crossed the threshold. "My name's Mariana Keller." Thomas closed the door behind her and moved to the hearth, stoking the embers to life. He pulled a tin of beans from the shelf and set it over the flame without asking more questions. "You look like you've walked a long way," he said quietly. "I have," she whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the wooden chair like she did not quite believe she had the right. "From Deer Lodge." Her voice cracked. "I ran." Thomas handed her the tin when the beans were warm, watching her hands tremble as she took it. "Eat first," he said. "Talk after." She nodded, spooning the food like it was the first real thing she had touched in days. The firelight flickered over her face, casting soft shadows on skin that had known too much sun and not enough sleep. Thomas sat across from her, his rifle resting against the wall behind him. He did not ask why she ran. Not yet. After a while, she spoke again, not looking at him. "I was meant to marry a man named Boyd Latham. My father arranged it, said it would keep us safe." She swallowed hard. "Boyd already had 2 children. His wife died last year. He wanted another mother for them, not a wife, not really." Thomas said nothing, just watched her eyes. I tried to be what they needed, but he was cruel." She looked at him then, eyes red but steady. "So I took my wedding dress and I ran. I have not eaten since Sunday." Thomas leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You have somewhere to go?" "No. Anyone looking for you, maybe, I do not know." "I left in the dark," he nodded once, slowly. "You can stay here tonight. There's a cot in the corner. I'll take the floor." Mariana's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you." He stood and grabbed a wool blanket from the trunk, setting it beside the cot. "It is not much, but it will keep you warm." She looked up at him, and for the first time her eyes softened. "You are kind." Thomas did not know what to say to that. He was not used to being called kind. He lived alone for a reason, too many people out there with too many needs. But something about her, something about the way she had knocked, the way she had looked at him, like he was the last hope she had left, stirred something quiet and unfamiliar in his chest. He nodded once and turned away. By morning, the frost had crept over the windows, and Thomas was already chopping wood when she stepped outside, arms wrapped around herself. "I can help," Mariana said. "You do not have to." Her chin lifted. "But I want to." He handed her a hatchet and showed her the smaller logs. She worked beside him, quiet and focused, the wind playing with the loose strands of her hair. Later, over a breakfast of cornmeal mush, she glanced at him. "You live here all alone, 3 years now. No wife?" He shook his head. "No, why not?" He looked at her, then down at his hands. "Tried once. She left before winter came, said there was not enough of me for the both of us." Mariana was quiet a long moment, then said, "She was wrong." Thomas met her eyes. There was something there, something soft but steady. He did not know what to call it yet. She stayed the next day. Then the next. When he came back from hunting on the 3rd morning, she had swept the cabin, set bread to rise, and mended the tear in his coat. She smiled when he stepped in, and something in his chest tightened in a way that did not hurt. "You do not have to do all this," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I want to." They shared dinner that night in silence, the kind that felt full rather than empty. When he walked her to the cot, she touched his hand lightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For saving me." He really looked at her, and in that moment he saw something more than a runaway bride. He saw a woman with grit sewn into her bones. He saw the promise of something he had not dared to want in years. "You should rest," he said, voice low. But even after she closed her eyes, Thomas sat by the fire a while longer, staring at the embers. Something had shifted. He had fed her, yes, but she had given him something too, something unspoken still. He did not have words for it, not yet, but he felt it. In her eyes, he had seen the promise of tomorrow. The snow came early that year, quiet and thick, muffling the world in white. By the end of the first week, the trail into the foothills had vanished beneath drifts, and the pine boughs sagged low under the weight of it. Thomas had spent the morning reinforcing the roofline with fresh timber braces, while Mariana stood near the edge of the trees, watching the sky change with the weather. She didn't speak much that day, but in the evening, after the stew had simmered down and the fire cast a soft light across the cabin, she set a folded bundle on the table between them. "I found muslin in the chest near the back wall," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. There was enough to make some proper curtains for the windows. The flour sacks weren't keeping the cold out. Thomas eyed the bundle, neatly hemmed and stitched with a steady hand. "You sew?" he asked. "My mother taught me when I was little. She said cloth tells its own story, and if you mend it well, it remembers you." He ran his hand along the edge of the fabric, then nodded toward the hearth. "You want help hanging them?" She gave the smallest of smiles, and they worked together in the warm hush of the firelight. She held the nails steady while he drove them in, careful not to split the wood. When it was done, the muslin hung clean and pale, softening the corners of the room in a way neither of them expected. That night, she sat on the floor near the fire, her knees drawn up, a piece of kindling in her hand. She traced lines into the ash with it, not looking up. "Did you have brothers?" she asked. "One," Thomas said. "Younger, name was Ali." "Was," he nodded once, "caught fever back in '68. There wasn't much to be done." She was quiet, and he thought maybe she'd let it lie, but then she said, "I had a brother too, Jacob. He left for Texas 2 years ago, never wrote back." Thomas leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "You think something happened?" "I don't know," she said. "He was always restless, said the world was wider than what we'd been given. I think maybe he found something better and didn't look back." Thomas considered that. Or maybe he didn't know how to write what he found. She tilted her head at that, a thoughtful pause stretching between them. "Do you think a person can start over, even if they've already been broken once?" He looked at her then, really looked, and found no trace of the girl who'd shivered at his door. In her place sat a woman with calloused hands and a spine that hadn't bent, only bowed. "I think broken things still hold," he said. The next day, she asked to come with him to check the traps. He hesitated, but she wrapped her scarf twice around her neck and pulled on his spare mittens without waiting for an answer. They walked in silence through the woods, the air sharp with cedar and the distant call of crows. She stepped carefully, her boots sinking into the crust of snow, eyes alert to every shift in the branches. At the third trap, they found a fox with a crushed paw. Thomas moved slow, knife already in hand, but Mariana crouched beside the animal, her breath rising in a soft cloud. "It's still alive," she said. He didn't answer. Winter didn't leave room for mercy. But then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a strip of the muslin she'd saved. "Let me?" He watched as she wrapped the injured leg, her fingers sure and gentle. The fox didn't fight her. When she finished, she opened the trap and let it limp free into the trees. "You'll never see it again," he said. "I don't need to," she replied, standing. "It's enough that it got a chance." Back at the cabin, he sharpened his axe while she boiled spruce tips into tea, the scent filling the room. She didn't speak of the fox again, didn't try to explain herself. He didn't ask. That evening, as the wind rattled the corners of the roof, she sat across from him, hands curled around the warm tin cup. She studied him a long moment, then said, "You don't talk about your past much," he shrugged. "Not much to say. You miss her." "The one who left," he met her eyes, steady and calm. "I miss the idea of her, not the truth of her." Mariana nodded slowly. "I understand that. She stood then, moved to the narrow shelf above the hearth and placed a small pine cone beside a flat stone he'd picked up near the creek last spring. No explanation, just a quiet offering. Then she turned and looked at him. "I think I'd like to stay through winter," she said. He didn't answer right away. Just watched her in the firelight, her face steady, her hands no longer trembling. "You'd be welcome," he said. "If that's what you want." She smiled, not soft this time, but certain. "I do." The moon hung low and wide above the ridge, casting long silver shadows between the trees. By then, Mariana had taken to brushing her hair by the fire each night, the strokes slow and deliberate, fingers working through the tangles as though each knot held something she was trying to forget. Thomas didn't ask what those things were. He just took to whittling in the evenings, letting the rhythm of her brushing and the scrape of his knife fill the quiet. One morning, while thawing a pair of boots too stiff to wear, Mariana glanced toward the shelf where Thomas kept a stack of folded maps and a compass wrapped in oilcloth. "You ever travel beyond the mountains?" she asked, lifting the boot to the hearth. He didn't look up from the strip of hide he was cutting. "Went south once, followed the river as far as Bannack, didn't stay." "Why not?" "Too many men trying to make things quick." "I don't trust places where the buildings go up faster than the trees can grow back." She nodded, curling her knees beneath her. "My mother used to say a man's pace tells you more about him than his words." Thomas scratched at his chin, then leaned back. "What was she like?" Mariana traced a seam in the floorboards with her thumb. "She made soap from lye and pine ash, sang when she worked. Sometimes, when she thought no one was listening, she'd dance a little while the pot boiled." She smiled faintly at the memory, but it didn't last. "Was she still alive when you left?" Thomas asked. "No," Mariana said. "She passed 2 winters ago. After that, it was just father and me. He couldn't see me without seeing her. I think that's what made him say yes to Boyd Latham." Thomas didn't say anything. He just set the hide aside and reached for more wood, feeding the fire with slow, even movements. That afternoon, Thomas returned from the ridge with 2 rabbits and a fresh dusting of snow on his shoulders. He found Mariana in the lean-to, sleeves rolled up, her arms deep in a barrel washing linens with boiled spruce water. "You ever used a draw knife?" he asked, stepping past the hanging sides of the canvas. She wiped her hands on her skirt. "Not since I was 13. He nodded toward the bench behind the cabin. "I was thinking to shape some new pegs for the wall. The old ones are splitting." She followed him without hesitation, and together they sat on the bench, the cold biting through their coats as they worked. The draw knife curled back strips of wood falling to the ground like pale ribbons. She moved with focus, her hands steady, wrists strong. "You ever think about going back?" he asked after a while, "to Deer Lodge?" Her voice was low. "No. There's nothing left there that knows my name in a kind way." Thomas turned the peg in his hand, measuring its taper. "You think you'd stay here then?" She didn't answer right away, but when she did, her voice was clear. "I'd like to build something that doesn't ask me to shrink to fit it." That night, the wind picked up. The shutters trembled and the fire burned low. Mariana stood by the window, watching the snow swirl through the dark. "When spring comes," she said without turning around, "would you show me how to plant in the soil here? I never learned. Father did all that." Thomas looked up from the tin he was mending. "I could do that." She turned then, her face pale in the glow of the fire, eyes steady. "And if I stayed for the planting? Could I stay for the harvest too?" His answer was quiet but certain. "You could stay for all of it." She crossed to him, not in haste, but with a kind of resolve that settled into the floorboards as surely as the snow outside. When she sat beside him, their shoulders touched and neither moved away. "I didn't come here looking for anything," she said. "I just wanted to be safe." Thomas set the tin aside. "And now, I still want that," she said. "But I think I might want someone to be safe with." He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't need to. The space between them had already closed. Outside, the storm quieted. Inside, the fire caught again and the warmth held. By mid-February, the light had begun to stretch longer in the afternoons. laying gold across the cabin floor as though testing the shape of spring. The snow still held fast in the shadows, but water ran beneath it now, whispering beneath the crusted banks of the creek, and the pine needles glistened with melt. Thomas came in from hauling a felled spruce, his shoulders damp with sweat and sawdust clinging to his cuffs. Mariana sat near the table, piecing together scraps of canvas to form a carry sack, her brow furrowed in quiet focus. He dropped the brace of rope near the door and reached for the kettle. "You always knew how to stitch like that?" She didn't look up. "No. I ruined more seams than I kept when I started, but I had time, and I wanted my hands to be good at something that stayed finished." He poured the hot water into a cup, letting the warmth settle into his palms before taking a seat across from her. "You work like someone waiting for something." She paused, then tied off the thread before meeting his eyes. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll forget how it felt, the way I used to flinch when the door opened too quick, how I kept my voice small so no one raised theirs." Thomas didn't speak. He let the space between them hold still. "I don't want to waste the quiet," she said, "so I make things, I fix what I can." He nodded once, then leaned forward. "You ever want to make something bigger?" She studied him, then glanced toward the window, where the slope beyond the cabin caught the last of the sun. "I've never built anything that could stand on its own, just mended what was already there." Thomas ran a thumb along the rim of his cup. "I've got timber stacked behind the shed, enough to frame out a separate room, thought about it last fall but didn't see the point at the time." Mariana turned back to him, her eyes steady. And now he held her gaze. "Now there's a reason." She didn't blush or drop her eyes. She nodded once, then folded the canvas and pushed it aside. "If we do it, I want to help saw the joists. You've been doing the hard things alone long enough." That night they didn't light the lantern. They let the fire burn low and sat by its glow, the hush between them neither heavy nor hollow. Thomas watched the curve of her cheek as she braided her hair, each motion deliberate, her back straight. "You always sit like that," he said. "Like what?" "Like someone who doesn't expect to be looked at." She turned her head but didn't stop braiding. "It's hard to unlearn." He stood, crossed the space between them, and knelt beside her. He didn't touch her, just sat close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "I see you," he said. She didn't speak, but her fingers slowed, then stilled. The following day they began clearing space beyond the hearth wall. Mariana measured the cut lengths while Thomas marked the frame posts with his awl. They worked until dusk, hands chapped, nails blackened, saying little. Later, while he closed the shutters against an icy wind, she set down the tin cup she'd been drying and said, "I don't think I was ever asked what I wanted before." Thomas turned. "You're asked now." She crossed the room, her hand brushing the edge of his sleeve. "I want to stay. Not just through spring." He didn't answer with words, only reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the touch slow, certain. Outside, snow began to fall again, not heavy, but soft, like the land was making peace with its last cold breath before yielding to thaw. Inside, the fire crackled on and two people stood close, no longer strangers to warmth or to each other. By March, the cabin had changed. The new room stood solid against the back wall, its frame tight and flush, timber seemed sealed with a mixture of clay, and moss Thomas had gathered from the north slope. A single window faced the rise where the sun crested each morning. Mariana had sewn a plain curtain from one of the older flour sacks, washing the print from it until it hung clean and pale. One morning, while the creek was still half ice, she stepped into the doorway of that room holding a folded dress. Pale blue, simple, with long sleeves and a hem that brushed her boots. "I made it from the muslin you didn't use for the cot," she said, voice even. "I thought it might be good to have something clean for when the thaw comes." Thomas looked up from the basket of kindling he was sorting. "You planning to meet someone out there?" She smiled with the corner of her mouth. "Not anymore." He stood and brushed his palms together. "Put it on," she blinked. "Now," he nodded once. "You've been mending and working for months. Let the day look at you proper." She stepped back into the room without a word and returned minutes later, the dress soft over her shoulders, her hair gathered at the nape of her neck. The firelight caught the faint line of thread at the collar, and Thomas's breath caught. "You look like you belong here," he said. "I feel like I do." That night, they shared the bed in the new room. No ceremony, no declaration, just the slow, steady choice of two people who had watched each other through winter and found something worth keeping. In the days that followed, they moved in rhythm. Thomas repaired the fence that circled the small clearing. Mariana gathered yarrow and dried roots to keep for the warm months. She began pressing herbs between the pages of his old ledger, storing names and uses until the margins were filled. One morning, while Thomas shaved curls from a sapling to make a tool handle, Mariana came to him holding a folded bundle wrapped in wool. "I want you to have this," she said, offering it out. Inside was a square of linen, stitched with small, even letters, his name, the year, and a line of threadwork pine trees along the edge. "I thought maybe it could be the start of something, not just a keepsake. A mark." He ran his fingers over the stitches, then looked up. "You marking time with me? I already have." They planted together when the ground softened, potatoes first, then beans. She knelt beside him in the dirt, sleeves rolled, her hands strong and certain. He watched her work and thought about the way she had once flinched at shadows and now moved without fear. One evening in late April, after the last frost had passed, Thomas laid a smooth piece of pine on the table beside the hearth. Carved into it were two names, his and hers, and beneath them, the word home. "I thought we might hang it outside," he said. Mariana ran her hand across the grain. "You carved it for us." She leaned into him, her shoulder against his chest. "Then let's put it up together." They did, just before supper. The sign hung above the door where it caught the last of the light. That summer, travelers passed now and then, traders, a pair of brothers trailing mules, one woman from Helena searching for her sister. Mariana offered water and bread when folks stopped, and Thomas stood by the gate with his rifle slung but never raised. None of them asked if she was his wife. None of them needed to. One afternoon, she sat on the porch mending a strap when she said, "I've been thinking about teaching a few things. To women, mostly. About herbs and stitching and how to keep meat through winter without spoiling." Thomas looked up from the saddle leather he was oiling. "You think they'll come all the way out here for that? If they need it bad enough, they will. I would have." He nodded. "Then we'll make room." By the end of the season, they had added a bench beneath the window and cleared a space beside the stove for drying herbs. She taught one girl how to bind a wound with pine pitch and another how to dye cloth using walnut husks. Thomas built a second stool so the women could sit while they listened. They never spoke of Deer Lodge again. Not because it was forgotten, but because it no longer held anything they needed. In the fall, they walked out past the ridge where the fox had limped away months before. The leaves burned gold and red, and the wind carried the scent of pine and river stone. "I didn't think I'd have a future," she said, pausing beneath a cottonwood. "Not one I could choose." Thomas took her hand, rough and warm, in his. "You built this one." They stood a while longer, the sky open above them. When they returned to the cabin, the fire already banked and the shutters drawn against the wind, Thomas unlatched the door and stepped aside. "After you," he said. Mariana crossed the threshold with steady steps, her hand still in his. They never left. Years passed, quiet and full. The cabin weathered and grew. Her threadbare dress was replaced with one dyed deep from summer berries. His beard grayed along the edges. They spent long evenings reading by firelight, their chairs pulled close, their hands often touching without needing to hold. Neighbors came to know them as steady folk, the kind you could trust with your sorrow and your seed. They were never loud, never grand, but they were lasting. And in the clearing beyond the porch, wildflowers grew without permission, bright and stubborn and free. Just like the life they had chosen together.